Hello. So today we are taking a look at something called a DME Arc. So a DME Arc is simply an instrument approach procedure. It's a way to transition from flying towards an airport into a position where you are lined up with the runway for landing. And because it's an instrument procedure, it can be flown using only instruments in bad weather. So there's a couple of things you'll need to know to perform a DME Arc approach. You will need to be familiar with reading approach charts. You'll need to be comfortable with VOR navigation, and as an extension to that, understand how to use a DME. Also, if you want to land, knowing how to land using an ILS system will help as well. Now, I've done tutorials on all of these, so if you want, you can click on the screen now or on a link in the description and have a look at those. Okay, so what happens during a DME arc? Well, let's imagine that we have our airport here, and we're approaching from the south, and we want to be landing on this southwest end of the runway. For a DME arc arrival, an imaginary circle is drawn around the airport at a set distance. For this example, let's say there's a circle with a 10 nautical mile radius. What basically happens is we continue flying in a straight line until we hit that circle around the airport. Then we turn and follow the curve of the circle until we are in line with the runway. Then we simply turn and approach the runway. That's the very basics of how to fly a DME arc. Now, sometimes you might have to fly a small arc, which is a short distance around the circle, or you may end up flying a big arc. But the idea is the same. You're flying a long curve around an airport and maintaining a constant distance at the same time. So hopefully now you understand what a DME looks like. Let's have a look at how you actually fly it and how you control your instruments. So to begin with, you'll be flying directly towards the airport. Now when you reach the specified distance, the first thing to do is to turn 90 degrees to begin following the arc. Now the easiest way to fly the arc isn't actually a long, slow turn. It's actually much easier to fly short, straight legs, like so. To do this, you'll need to constantly adjust your VOR indicator. So allow me to try and demonstrate and explain at the same time. First of all, let's have a look at a real world example. This is an approach chart for Inverness. Where else was I going to fly? For this example, I'm going to be approaching from the northwest and lining up from runway 05. So let's have a look at some of these markings on the charts. You can see that we have the airport in the centre with its nav-aid information box there, but we also have a 10 nautical mile circle drawn around the airport. This isn't actually the DME arc, this is just to give a sense of scale on the chart. Now let's follow our approach in from the northwest. Rather conveniently, we have a waypoint up here called Garva, so that will be our starting point. It's at a DME distance of 17 nautical miles from the INS VOR, and there's also an altitude constraint there telling us not to fly below 4,900 feet. If you follow the approach towards the airport, you'll see that it gives us the radial that we need to fly, which is 306 degrees. Now the next part of the approach is to turn onto the arc. On the chart, there's a little mark here which indicates that at 14 nautical miles, that's the point that we begin the turn to join the arc. Also note that we need to be at or above 3,600 feet as well. So let's jump into the plane so you can see this approach in action up to this point. Okay, so here we are in the plane. Now I've just taken off and I've just flown northwest of Inverness. You can see that I've currently got the nav1 radio tuned in, and I've got it set to a radial of 306 degrees. And now we're not on the radial yet, as you can see the needle is deflected there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn just now and get ourselves established on that radial so we can intercept that and fly back towards Inverness. So just should be quite close to it, so it shouldn't take too long to get onto it there. And remember, at 17 nautical miles, that will put us over the Garva waypoint. Now we also needed to be at or above 4,900 feet. I've currently got the autopilot handling heading and altitude, which is currently 5,000 feet, as you can see both in the autopilot here and on the altitude here. So you can see that the needle's starting to move now, so we're starting to get back onto that radial. So just when it gets a couple of dots away, then what I'll do is I'll turn to the reciprocal of 306 degrees, which would be 126 degrees. So we'll just keep flying kind of perpendicular to the radial at the moment, which is a heading of, well, I'm flying 210 degrees, but that's just about 90 degrees to the radial there. And you can see we're at 17.5 nautical miles, so it shouldn't take too long to get over that Garver waypoint. You can see we're actually 17.4 nautical miles now, so we're actually flying towards it slightly. Pardon me. Okay, so just getting ready to turn any second now. Because we're quite a distance away from the airport, the needle will move a bit slower, so you just need to kind of factor that in when making the turn. Right, so that's almost centered now, so we'll turn around to 126 degrees, which is, oops, just about there. And you can see we're at 17.1 nautical miles, so we're pretty much flying over the Garver waypoint just now. So this is us just turning to begin our approach in from the northwest to join that DME Arc. What I'll do is I'll take the heading round to 120 just in case. Now that we're past the Garver waypoint, we can descend down to 3,600 feet now. That was the second kind of waypoint on the approach there, and that was at a distance of 14 nautical miles. That's when we can begin the turn. So we'll just start to descend now, just reduce the power so we don't pick up too much speed, or rather so we can maintain the speed. And we're just keeping an eye on the VOR indicator there, make sure we're tracking that radio properly, and also keeping an eye on the DME there, because remember at 14 nautical miles that's when we, well, should begin our turn, but I won't do it at 14 nautical miles, and I'll explain why. I'll explain why in a moment. Need to reduce the speed a little bit more. So you can see we're slightly off the radio there, but it's not a big deal. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Just maybe turn to the right ever so slightly. I think that's actually taking us further off the radio, to be honest. But there we go, that's 14 nautical miles there. So looking at the chart again, you can see that we are just about here on the approach. Now if we look at the actual arc, we can see that it's telling us to descend to no lower than 2,700 feet. And the important part here, it's a DME distance of 12 nautical miles. So this is a 12 nautical mile DME arc. So let's jump back into the plane and fly onto the arc. Okay, so as we pass 14 nautical miles, there's a couple of things we can do. First is to set the autopilot down to 2,700 feet, which is the altitude that was listed against the arc there. Now, the chart told us that at 14 nautical miles, that's when we can begin the turn. That actually takes into account if you're flying a faster aircraft, it gives you space and time to do the turn. In a slow aircraft like a Cessna, you can actually get away with doing the turn onto the arc about half a nautical mile away from the arc itself. So at 12.5 nautical miles, that's when we'll make the turn to the right, and I'll be turning 90 degrees to the right. So just to make it a bit easier for numbers and stuff, what I'm actually going to do is just turn to a heading of 210 degrees rather than 216, which should be accurate. That's 12.5 there, so let's turn now. And then what I'll also do is I'll also reduce the radial that we're flying to by 10 degrees. So we'll turn it to, let's say 295 again, just to make numbers a bit easier to follow. So this technique of flying the arc is going to be something called a turn 10, twist 10. The basic idea is that you turn 10 degrees on your heading and then adjust the VOR indicator by 10 degrees. Now you can see that the needle is moving from the left back towards the center. When the needle centers up, that's when you turn 10 and then twist 10. So I'll show you just now when we get there. You can see we're now at 11.7 nautical miles. You don't have to be too strict with the distance. You can get away with being 1 nautical mile either inside or outside of the distance there. But the low ground speed is something that you do want as well. Okay, so that's the needle centered there. So what I'm going to do is turn 10 degrees to the left and then adjust the VOR indicator by 10 degrees. And you can see the needle will start to move towards the center again. We're still at a distance of 11.7 nautical miles. Then we fly straight for a short while, just until this centers up again. And then again we turn 10 and then twist 10. So this is what I mean by you fly sort of short straight legs and then you just turn slightly, fly another straight leg and then turn again. So just waiting for the needle to center up. You can see the plane's leveling out, so we'll just increase the throttle slightly just to maintain speed. Okay, needle centered, so turn 10 degrees and then twist 10 degrees. And you just keep repeating that process around the arc. Now it's easy to kind of get too focused on doing the turn 10, twist 10, so you need to be aware of when to exit the arc and when to actually line up with the runway. So I believe on the charts it listed a radial of 248 degrees as being the point at which you would turn from flying the arc towards the airport to line up with the runway. Now again, because you should be practicing in a slow aircraft like a Cessna, what I'll do is I'll actually just set up my secondary VOR to match the heading of the runway, and then that way we should, and then once we start getting movement on the secondary VOR, then that gives us enough time and space to turn there. So you can see the distance is still 11.6 nautical miles, so we're still holding a constant distance. The needle centers up, so turn 10, twist 10. So you know you're flying a good arc when the DME distance is constant and when your ground speed is very, very low, if not at 0. Now it will jump slightly when you make the turn, because effectively you are ever so slowly moving towards the VOR station at this point, but you'll notice as we fly this sort of leg of the journey, the ground speed will get lower and lower. And what I'll do is I'll also set up the second VOR indicator now. So the runway heading at Inverness is 055. So we'll set that there. So when we start seeing some movement on this VOR indicator, that's when we know we're getting close to lining up with the runway. So just wait for this to center up. Distance is 11.6 nautical miles, so we're doing pretty good this way around. Okay, so turn 10. Oops, wrong way. Twist 10. And you'll also see on the chart, I believe on the chart the sort of the arc exit radial was 248 degrees. So you can see that we're getting very close to 250, a radial of 250 there. So hopefully in a couple of sort of turns time we should be ready to line up with the runway. So you can see the distance is 11.5 nautical miles. Again, you don't need to be too strict with the distance. As long as you're within about 1 nautical mile of the DME Arc distance, then you've got nothing to worry about. So just wait for the needle to center up once more. And obviously during these these straight legs of flight, you'd also be preparing the plane to land, so setting up landing lights and doing your checklists and whatnot. So there's the needle centered up there. So turn 10, twist 10. Now you notice that, whoops, because we're flying anti-clockwise around the arc, you'll notice that my radial numbers are getting lower. So we started on 360 and then it was, 306, and then we went to sort of, it would have been 296, 286, 276, 266. So the radial that we're flying is getting lower and lower as we fly anti-clockwise. If we were flying in the other direction, if we were flying a clockwise arc, then the radial number would be getting higher each time. And of course we would be, when we make our turn adjustments here, those would be getting higher as well, in 10-degree increments. So you can see distance 11.4 nautical miles. So we're getting closer ever so slowly. Not a big deal, as I said. If I wanted to regain some of that distance, all I would do is I would simply fly this leg a bit longer, because that would take me away from the VOR station. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that just now, actually. I'm just going to hold this heading for a short while. But we can actually see we've got some movement on the secondary VOR now as well. So that's okay. So what I'll do is I'll just turn 10 degrees again. Don't really need to. And then once we get to sort of a couple of dots on this indicator, then what I will do is turn to a heading of 055 degrees, which matches the runway heading. So we're not sort of disregarding this completely, because we'll need this in a second. So there we go, so we're getting it close enough now. Now something else that I've done that I didn't mention is we're going to be needing this top VOR again, because if we now flick over to this frequency 108.5, that's the ILS frequency for Inverness Airport there, and for the runway 05 at Inverness. And now you can simply just line yourself up with the ILS as needed and go ahead and land the plane. So if we have a pause of that and have a look at the flight analysis, if you have a look now, you can see this is where we entered the arc from the northwest, and then we can see that we've got a nice, what appears to be a nice long curve, but as you saw in the demonstration just now, it's actually a bunch of short, sort of short straight legs. But you can see over a distance it looks like a nice long curve. So there you go. So that's how you fly a DME Arc. Okay, so it is also possible to fly a DME Arc using the GPS in FSX. So obviously, first of all, make sure you're set to use GPS as your navigation source. And then if you bring up the GPS menu here, now first thing to do is go to Procedures and then select Approach. Inverness Airport there. If we drop down to the approach, we want ILS runway 05, so take that one. Now DME arcs are listed as having D and then the radial number at which they start at. Now not all DME approaches will be available, but this I'll show you this example. This is approaching Inverness Airport from the south. So D on the radial 193. We'll enter that, and you can see down there that's the kind of the bottom part of the radial from the south there. So we will go straight into activation for that, and close that. Flick onto nav quickly, and if we clear that screen, you can see it's giving us that approach there. If we have a look at the flight plan there, you can see it also gives us the DME Arc. So the next waypoint will be the radial 193, and then it gives us the DME Arc procedure, and then a couple more waypoints on the run into runway 05. We'll just clear the screen there. And you can see there's D193N, and then 215, radial of 215, and then radial of 227. Now remember, the GPS in FSX, or the default GPS in FSX, only gives you sort of your lateral navigation. It won't control your altitude automatically as well, so you do need to be aware of that when you're flying this. But as you see, just waiting to pass over this waypoint. And you see that as the next kind of leg of the journey gets activated, you can see that it gives us the 2 waypoints there with a new sort of little icon there, a little curved arrow to show that you're on a DME Arc procedure. One final point I want to mention: we looked at entering a DME Arc procedure from outside of the DME circle, but it is possible to fly into the circle and join the arc like so. The method for flying it will be the same. You turn perpendicular to the starting radial, and then turn 10, twist 10, depending on whether you're flying clockwise or anti-clockwise. So that's about it for DME Arcs. As always, if you have any questions, just ask below and I'll answer them as best as I can. Anyways, the next tutorial will be on holding patterns, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much for watching, take care out there, and I'll catch you later.